Hi guys, welcome back to Swordwind. We are the Charlotte branch of the New York Historical Fencing Association. My name is Eric Lowe, and in this video we're talking about the action of the lower body in foundational longsword cutting. In our previous videos we talked about how the arms do not generate power in a cut. They are mostly there to steer or to transmit power. Now we've come to the part of cutting where most of your power actually does come from, and that is the action of the hips. You'll notice I'm standing with my right foot advanced and my sword on the right side of my body. This is to simulate having taken a passing step, which, as you can see, rotates my body from pointed out to my right to pointed out to my left. Here in NIFA, we practice our cutting mostly with the step having already been taken. This is artificial, of course, because you don't generally fight people in longsword cutting anyway, like this. But the pedagogical reason for this is because a passing step rotates the body naturally, and if you do it wrong, it can even rotate the body not at all. I can back up a little bit here. I can face square onto the camera, take a passing step, and my hips have barely rotated at all. That brings me into measure of my opponent, but it doesn't power a cut. So when I am just practicing cutting and I'm trying to train my body how to operate the weapon, I'm going to pre-take my step, cock the body back over that hip to simulate how my body would have been refused, and then I'd bring the sword side of my body forward, and then deliberately untwist my hips. The deliberateness is the key here. You want to make sure that you are training your mind and your body to make this rotation because you want it to, not because it happens by accident as you take a step. The key to being able to generate greater amounts of power later on is how in control of this hip rotation are you. Very powerful longsword cutting doesn't suddenly add in the arm muscles. You can increase your power by getting a more explosive grip, but there's only so much that these muscles can do compared to these muscles. So, rotate the hip and let that cast the sword forward. You see, I've ended here in our kind of prototypical Oberhau ending position. This point between my hands in line with my body, point of the sword in line with that line. That is really all there is to the lower body when you do it right, until we get to the feet. Now the key to the feet here is that they must be grounded before your sword lands. Flat on the ground with both feet. This is not to say that you fence this way. We don't fence around flat-footed all the time. It's very slow and you're likely to never to get an opportunity to land a cut. So fence on the balls of your feet, absolutely, but in the instant that your sword lands, you must be grounded. Let me qualify that. It is entirely possible to wound somebody without your feet grounded. If you want to make an optimally powerful cut, both feet need to be flat on the ground. And the reason I think it's worth training that way is because we know that when people are under stress, their form goes to pot. Train to do it optimally, and when adrenaline is coursing through your system and you're terrified for your life, or you're just terrified that you're going to lose this tournament bout, you will at least have a useful form that you kind of fall down to. So, that really is all there is to say about the lower body. Now let's talk about why we want that. Actually, let's talk about why feet flat on the ground is useful for power generation. The key here is basically that anytime your sword impacts an object, there is a reaction force to that. Even if your sword is passing through the target very cleanly, the target will be exerting force back. So, in order to absorb that force most effectively, you need to be grounded with the earth. If you are up on one foot or partially grounded, your ability to absorb that force will be lessened, and that will lessen the power of your cut. So that really is all there is to it when we're talking about the action of the lower body in cutting. There's obviously a lot of things to say about stepping, but we're not going to talk about that in this video. This is simply about once you have reached the point where you are hitting your opponent, how do you make the sword do what it does? So let's talk about a couple of ways that can go wrong. One way, as I've said, is simply to not rotate the hips, and this is especially easy to do if you are kind of thoughtlessly taking passing steps, as I'm demonstrating now. You can take that step and cut, and the hips haven't done a thing. You can do it too, even if you take the step though. If I can cut kind of like this, and I'm not, you can hear the sword wind here in the garage, which tells me that my edge is aligned, but there's no real power behind that cut because I am not bothering to rotate my hips. The other thing that can often go wrong as we move down the leg is that the knees can turn in too much. Now there is a certain amount of turn in the knee that just happens anytime you rotate your body past a certain amount. But what you don't want to see is something like this, where your knee turns really far in. This is very uncomfortable to hold, but if you're doing your practice cuts and just kind of getting into the groove, sometimes you can do this and you don't even notice that your body is doing it, right? This collapses your structure. It's bad for your knee as well over time. Then going back down to the feet, the main thing here is to ensure that the feet actually are grounded. With Oberhau or descending cuts, that's usually not too hard to do when you are practicing. But if you're doing other kinds of cuts, for instance, a rising cut, it is not that hard. Turn it side on. You can see there's this desire to kind of do an arabesque with my foot as I rotate my body through. Now it is fine to rotate the foot with this kind of cut, but you need to stay grounded. So rather than coming up off your heel, screw the heel into the ground like this. That way your foot stays in contact with the ground and you have maximum stability when your sword impacts the target. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of ways that this can go wrong is harkening back to our previous videos. You don't want to lean the body forward, because when we cut, we're not trying to push the sword into somebody. There are times and places for draw cuts and push cuts in longsword fencing, but particularly in the KDF style that I practice, they are really fairly specialized, and you want to keep your hews and your push cuts and your draw cuts separated in your mind so that one doesn't accidentally turn into the other. There are times when you would hew and push or draw cut to kind of finish that cut off, but it always needs to happen deliberately, not by accident. So the way that that can go wrong with the upper body, as we've said, is you can just kind of lean forward like this as you hew, and that turns a little bit of your hew into a push cut. You can do the same thing though with your lower body. I can lean forward here with my knees, and even if my upper body is staying nice and level, the fact that I am doing this with my lower body means I am still pushing the sword into the opponent when my intention is to hew in, through, and out. So when you want to avoid pushing forward. You want to avoid turning the knees too much. You want to avoid popping your feet off the ground. And the last thing I should mention on the subject of knees turning, you want to avoid dropping your knees asymmetrically, which could have the effect of kind of tilting your body over as you cut. As you can imagine, this is not good for your cut tracking. It's also bad for your body. So, we've now talked about the action of the hands, action of the arms, the action of the lower body. To bring that all together in the kind of proper order of operations, you grip, hips, and extend. Grip, extend, grip, extend. Obviously, in order to cut for real, you need to make these things very fluid and connected, just as all the various parts of your body need to be turning or extending kind of in the same motion as you cut. But for practice purposes, it's totally fine, and I actually recommend practicing grip, hip, extend, grip, hip, extend, grip, hip, extend, and then just slowly making that less jerky so that you can train your body to start in the right order of operations, but eventually get the whole thing into a single motion. I want to emphasize here, when we talk about the extension, right, when you do all of this nice and fluidly, I have a weight in my hands, the weight is moving forward, and I'm throwing my body, throwing that weight forward as I rotate this side of my body. That is primarily what causes the arms to extend. As we talked about last video, I'm not saying that you literally have no muscle tone in your arms. That's not going to work. But you want to make when we do this really jerkily, I have to extend with my arms. The more we make it fluid, the more this motion of the sword should be what drives my arms forward, until I can just kind of throw my hips forward and the sword just falls. So that ends our little 3-video series about what is going on when you are just operating the sword and not worrying about footwork or how you get to the point that you would need to operate the sword against your target. In the next video, I'm going to talk about some of where this comes from, what is historical, what is not, what can be extrapolated from sources, even if it's not explicit, and what other historical ways of doing this there might be, even if it's not the way that I teach. Until then, I hope this has been useful for you, and I'll see you next week. Hi guys, in editing this video I realized that you can't really see what my feet are doing, which most of the time is fine, but when I'm talking about what your feet shouldn't be doing, I figure we should reshoot that. So, what I'm talking about in the section with the rising cuts is the tendency to want to do this, where my heel comes way off the ground. That lessens my structure as I cut. Instead, what I want to do is screw the heel into the ground like this. Now you'll notice that if I do that wrong, I have a little bit of a tendency to kind of drop my body. That is suboptimal. You can screw your heel into the ground a little bit and minimize that body drop like this. But the fact that I am lengthening this leg means that my body weight is going to be dropping. There are some cuts in which that is actually useful. When I'm cutting up, though, I don't want my body to be dropping. I don't want the action of my body to be working against what the sword is doing. In a similar manner, I don't want to pop up when I am cutting down. You sometimes see people, especially when they're beginning cutters, sometimes people with a sport fencing background do this, or just people who get really excited, they cut down and they do it like this. Now, even if sometimes they do that even without raising off their feet. They'll get down, they'll be fighting from a nice kind of low stance here, and they pop up just by straightening their knees as they cut down. You can absolutely wound somebody that way. There are a lot of things you can do with a sword that will wound somebody, but if we're talking about what the optimal cut is and how you should be training your body to cut, you don't want your blade to be coming down while the rest of you is coming up. That's taking some vector in your body that should be down or forward into the target and instead making it up. So, thanks for that. I'll see you.